Several years ago, an angler fishing the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania spent most of the day covering nearly 2.5 miles of shoreline without getting a single strike. Frustrated and ready to leave, he noticed an unusual dark patch on the water, about the size of a small table. On a whim, he made one cast into that spot and landed a walleye just minutes later. That experience taught him something valuable. Fish are rarely found where a location simply looks good from the bank. More often, they're holding where the river is quietly revealing clues. In this video, we'll explore how experienced anglers interpret those clues. No electronics, no sonar, no detailed depth charts, and no endless trial and error. Just practical observations that help reveal what's happening below the surface. Veteran river fishermen can often spot a promising area before they ever make a cast. They pay attention to current seams, water color, subtle surface movements, shoreline structure, and changes in flow. To a newcomer, every stretch of river may appear nearly identical: moving water, patches of sand, grassy banks, and the occasional fallen tree. But with experience, the river begins to tell a much deeper story. The reason is straightforward: fish do not distribute themselves evenly throughout a river system. A single small area may hold dozens of fish, while another spot only a few yards away can be completely empty. Understanding why fish choose certain locations is the key to success. We'll cover how to identify underwater structure without electronics, locate productive current breaks, deep holes, creek mouths, and shoreline cover, and most importantly, how to use the river's surface to uncover what's hidden below. Think about it this way: if you were looking for a place to eat, you'd probably choose somewhere that offered food, shelter, and comfort without forcing you to burn unnecessary energy. Fish operate under the same basic principles. They want easy access to food, protection from danger, and a location where they can hold without constantly fighting the current. Because of that, fish don't spread themselves evenly throughout a river. They gather in specific spots that provide the best combination of these advantages. If you've ever experienced one location producing fish after fish while another spot only a few yards away remains completely quiet, you've already seen this principle in action. Before we continue, let me know in the comments what river you fish most often and where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more fishing content. Current is much more than moving water. For fish, it acts like a natural food delivery system, carrying insects, larvae, worms, crustaceans, and other food downstream. But there's a trade-off. Holding directly in heavy current requires a lot of energy, and fish are always looking for ways to conserve it. That's why fish position themselves in strategic locations. They want to stay close enough to the current to intercept food while remaining in calmer water whenever possible. You'll often find them behind rocks, beside submerged timber, along drop-offs, beneath undercut banks, or anywhere fast water meets slower flow. These transition zones are incredibly important because they combine food, protection, and energy efficiency, all the things fish need to survive and feed successfully. Fish are often found wherever an open section of river bottom transitions into some form of structure or cover. It might be submerged timber, scattered rocks, weed growth, or brush. What appears insignificant to us can be extremely important to a fish because it creates a boundary between exposure and protection. These transition areas frequently become some of the most productive spots in the entire river. That's why experienced anglers have always said that featureless water rarely holds fish for long. Without food, shelter, current variation, or a change in depth, there's little reason for fish to stay. They gravitate toward places that offer an advantage: a drop-off, a submerged tree, a large boulder, an undercut bank, overhanging cover, or any irregularity that provides security and feeding opportunities. Another factor many fishermen overlook is oxygen. Not all parts of a river contain the same amount. Slow-moving pools and stagnant sections often have lower oxygen levels, especially during hot weather. Meanwhile, riffles, creek mouths, channel edges, and areas where currents mix tend to hold more oxygen. In summer, these differences become critical because fish are not only searching for food, they're also seeking places where conditions are more comfortable. Even with food and oxygen available, fish still need protection. They rarely spend much time exposed on open shallow flats. Productive areas are usually located near deeper water, shade, submerged cover, vegetation, or sharp depth changes that allow fish to retreat quickly if danger appears. That's why one small section of river can hold fish after fish while seemingly identical water nearby remains completely empty. That's why features such as a fallen tree, a drop-off along the channel, overhanging vegetation, or a steep bank are far more important than they might appear. To fish, these places function as safe zones where they can rest, avoid predators, and stay close to food being carried by the current. What looks like ordinary river scenery to us often serves as prime real estate underwater. A common mistake anglers make is viewing a river only from the surface. They see the shoreline, the flowing water, and the opposite bank, but the real action takes place below. Underwater, the river is full of ridges, depressions, slopes, hidden channels, and depth changes that are impossible to see at first glance. Fish position themselves according to this underwater terrain, not according to what the river looks like above the surface. Because of that, one of the most valuable skills in fishing is learning to visualize what lies beneath the water. You don't always need electronics to do it. Different species use different types of structure. Bass and pike often favor ambush cover, catfish tend to hold near deeper channel features, while smallmouth bass commonly relate to current seams, rocky areas, and underwater structure. Regardless of the species, the logic remains the same. Fish seek places that make life easier. They want access to food, nearby cover, and areas where they can conserve energy. If there's one type of structure that consistently attracts fish in almost every river, it's a channel edge or drop-off. Few features combine feeding opportunities, security, and travel routes as effectively as a significant depth change. A drop-off, sometimes called a channel edge, forms where the river bottom changes from a gentle slope to a much steeper decline. These underwater transitions are some of the most reliable fish-holding structures in any river system. Current naturally sweeps food along these edges, where it collects in small pockets, depressions, and uneven sections of the bottom. Fish can hold near the slope and feed efficiently on whatever the river carries past them. Many anglers automatically assume the deepest water must be located in the center of the river. In reality, that's often far from the truth. The main channel frequently hugs one side of the river, sometimes running surprisingly close to shore. It's entirely possible to stand on the bank only a short distance from deep water without realizing it. I remember fishing a broad river where the deepest channel was nowhere near the middle. At first glance, the center seemed like the obvious place to focus. But after spending time reading the bottom, it became clear that the most productive structure was located only a short cast from shore. The fish were concentrated there while much of the surrounding water held very little activity. The main channel usually mirrors the river's natural shape, curving and shifting with every bend. On outside bends, stronger current often cuts into the bank, creating deeper water and sharper underwater contours. These areas are always worth investigating because they combine depth, current, and structure, three ingredients that consistently attract feeding fish. The inside and outside banks of a river bend are often completely different environments. On the slower side of the bend, current loses speed and begins depositing sand, silt, and other sediment. Over time, this creates shallow flats, weed growth, reed beds, and gently sloping shorelines. By simply observing the banks, you can often make surprisingly accurate guesses about what the river looks like underwater. If one shoreline is steep, eroded, and noticeably higher while the opposite bank is low, gradual, and covered with vegetation, the deeper water is usually found near the steeper side. Rivers naturally reveal where the strongest current flows. Whenever I arrive at unfamiliar water, I spend time studying the shoreline first because it often provides valuable clues before I ever make a cast. I learned this lesson on a river I had never fished before. At first, I chose the easier bank because it was comfortable to access and looked inviting. After working the area for quite a while, I found nothing but shallow, featureless water. Eventually, I crossed to a steep, undercut bank that looked far less convenient but much more interesting. Within minutes, I discovered a sharp drop-off close to shore, and before long the area produced several quality fish. The difference wasn't luck, it was structure. Finding a drop-off without electronics is easier than many anglers think. A simple sinker can tell you a lot about the bottom. Cast it out, and slowly drag it back. Over a flat bottom, the weight moves steadily with very little change in resistance. As you pay attention to how it feels, you begin building a picture of the underwater terrain, and can quickly identify important features such as slopes, depressions, and channel edges. Eventually, you may feel the sinker behave differently. It might catch briefly, climb over a rise, or require a little extra effort to pull forward. Moments like that are important because they often signal a change in bottom structure. In many cases, you've just located the start of a drop-off, the point where a gradual bottom suddenly transitions into deeper water. Finding the structure is only half the job. You also need to know exactly where it is. Whether you use a reel clip, count your retrieve turns, or line up with a landmark across the river, accuracy matters. A productive spot loses much of its value if you can't place your bait back on it consistently. Repeatedly hitting the same target is often the difference between a great day and a frustrating one. It's also worth remembering that not every drop-off will hold fish. The best locations usually combine several features at once. A depth change becomes much more attractive when paired with a current seam, a submerged tree, a small eddy, or even a subtle bend in the structure itself. The more advantages a location offers, the more likely fish are to use it regularly. Another useful clue comes from shoreline vegetation. Watch where reeds, cattails, or grass grow continuously and where that growth suddenly ends. Quite often, those breaks in vegetation coincide with changes in depth. Even without electronics, small details like these can help you build a surprisingly accurate picture of the underwater landscape. A solid wall of reeds, cattails, or shoreline grass usually points to shallow water. These types of plants rarely establish themselves above a steep underwater slope. But when that vegetation abruptly ends and open water begins, it often signals a change in depth. In many rivers, that boundary marks the transition from a shallow flat into deeper water. The river is constantly providing information, you just have to learn how to interpret it. Shoreline shape, vegetation patterns, water color, and current direction all reveal something about the bottom structure. Successful anglers don't simply observe the water, they learn to translate those clues into a picture of what's happening below the surface. Even if the main channel lies closer to the opposite bank, that doesn't mean the fish are beyond casting range. Focus on locating a secondary drop-off, a depth change, or another piece of structure that you can reach consistently. Accuracy matters far more than maximum casting distance. Repeatedly placing your bait in the same productive zone will usually outperform random long casts every time. One area that consistently produces fish is a drop-off located near a river bend. As the main flow swings around the curve, the current speeds up in some places and slows in others, creating natural feeding lanes. Food carried by the current tends to collect around these features, while nearby depth and cover give fish a comfortable place to hold. When all of these elements come together, the result is often one of the most productive spots in the river. Seasoned anglers figured out long ago that fish are drawn to changes, not just depth. Anywhere fast-moving water meets slower current, where a flat bottom transitions into deeper water, or where the flow suddenly shifts direction, fish tend to concentrate. Meanwhile, long stretches of uniform river often hold surprisingly few fish, no matter how promising they appear from shore. A drop-off typically has two areas worth targeting. The upper edge often attracts feeding fish moving out of deeper water, while the lower edge serves as a comfortable holding zone where fish can rest in deeper, slower-moving water. That's why experienced fishermen rarely judge a spot after only a few casts. They thoroughly work both sections of the structure and explore different angles before deciding whether the area is productive. Sometimes everything seems perfect, a sharp drop, ideal depth, and favorable current, yet nothing bites. In those situations, don't give up too quickly. Move a short distance along the structure and try again. Fish are rarely spread evenly across an entire drop-off. More often, they're grouped around a specific feature such as a submerged log, a small depression, a bend in the contour, or a pocket of slower current. A move of only a few yards can completely change the outcome. Now let's turn our attention to riffles and shallow runs. These are areas where the river becomes shallower and the current speeds up as water flows over rocks, gravel, or uneven bottom structure. Many anglers overlook these sections because the water appears too shallow and fast. However, despite first impressions, riffles can be some of the most productive fish-holding areas in the entire river system. Many anglers underestimate riffles because of how they look. Shallow, fast-moving water doesn't seem like an obvious place to find fish. But appearances can be deceiving. These areas are often packed with life, largely because moving water constantly mixes with air and creates higher oxygen levels. During hot summer months, when slower sections of the river become less comfortable, fish are frequently drawn toward these well-oxygenated zones. Species such as smallmouth bass, trout, and other fish that thrive in current are commonly found around riffles. However, they rarely sit in the strongest flow itself. Instead, they position along current seams, behind rocks, inside small eddies, or anywhere the current weakens just enough to provide relief. These spots allow fish to conserve energy while still having a steady supply of food drifting past. The shallow, turbulent crest of a riffle may look attractive, but larger fish seldom spend much time there. The force of the current is simply too demanding. Fish are constantly balancing feeding opportunities against energy expenditure, and holding in the heaviest flow rarely makes sense for long periods. The area just downstream of a riffle is often a much better target. As the current loses speed, it frequently forms a deeper pocket or depression. Many experienced anglers consider these locations prime fish holding zones. The riffle functions like a natural feeding conveyor, carrying insects, crustaceans, and other food downstream. Those food items collect in the calmer water below, creating an ideal place for fish to rest and feed efficiently without fighting the strongest current. Another place that consistently holds fish is an eddy or calm water pocket formed near the shoreline. When the main flow collides with a bank, rock, or other obstruction, part of the current can reverse direction and create a slower moving zone. In some cases, the water even seems to flow backward. These areas are valuable because food tends to collect there while the stronger current continues carrying fresh forage nearby. Predatory fish such as northern pike, largemouth bass, and smallmouth bass frequently use these pockets as ambush points. They can sit comfortably out of the heavy flow and strike prey moving along the current edge. I once fished a small river where a shallow riffle looked far too skinny to hold decent fish. The water barely reached knee depth, and exposed rocks seemed to leave little room for larger predators. But just downstream was a small depression where the current began to soften. After casting into that transition area, I hooked a fish almost immediately. A quality smallmouth came first, followed by a couple more fish in a short period of time. As the season went on, that location continued producing. The lure wasn't anything special. The key was placing it in the exact spot where fish were using the slower water as a feeding zone. When fishing riffles and shallow water, stealth is critical. Fish in these areas are much easier to spook than fish holding deep. They can detect vibrations, shadows, and movement along the bank surprisingly well. Sometimes one careless step is enough to send fish scattering before you even make a cast. Approaching quietly, keeping your distance, and minimizing noise can make a huge difference in how productive a spot becomes. Large rocks deserve special attention when you're reading a river. In shallow runs and riffles, every sizable boulder changes the flow around it. While the surface may reveal only a small disturbance, underwater the rock creates a protected pocket where the current weakens. These sheltered areas allow fish to rest comfortably without constantly fighting the flow. Species such as smallmouth bass, walleye, burbot, and other ambush predators often use these current breaks. The rock creates what many anglers call a current shadow, a place where fish can hold with minimal effort while keeping an eye on food drifting by. If you notice exposed boulders, subtle boils, or swirling water, don't assume it's just random turbulence. Those features often indicate fish holding structure below. Rather than casting directly at the rock, focus on the calmer water immediately behind it, where fish are most likely positioned. Deep holes are another critical feature in any river. They're much more than simply the deepest spots on the map. For larger fish, a deep hole often serves as a refuge, a place to escape summer heat, avoid predators, recover energy, and spend long periods when conditions elsewhere become unfavorable. However, not every deep hole produces fish equally well. The most productive holes are usually connected to moving water. Current enters them, flows through them, and continues downstream. These active holes constantly receive fresh oxygen and drifting food, making them far more attractive than stagnant pockets of deep water. Because conditions remain favorable, fish in these areas tend to stay active and feed more consistently throughout the season. A deep pool with little or no current behaves very differently. Fish may still use it, and sometimes the biggest fish in the river spend time there, but getting them to feed can be a challenge. Without steady water movement, oxygen levels tend to be lower and very little natural food drifts through. As a result, fish often become less active, and even heavy baiting may fail to produce consistent action. When a deep hole is connected to current, it usually contains 3 important sections. The first is the upstream entrance, where the flow begins slowing down before dropping into deeper water. Food naturally accumulates here, making it a prime feeding area, especially during low-light periods such as dawn and dusk. The second section is the deepest part of the hole. This area often serves as a resting zone for larger, more cautious fish. It may not always be the most productive place to get bites, but it's where many fish spend much of their time. The third key area is the downstream end of the hole. As the current gains speed again, it carries baitfish, insects, and other food out of the deeper water. Predators frequently position themselves nearby to take advantage of these easy feeding opportunities. Fish such as pike, walleye, and smallmouth bass often use these locations as natural ambush points. Over the years, I've had some of my best results near the entrance to deep holes, particularly in spring. After months of cold water, fish become increasingly active and begin searching aggressively for food. The zone where the current first starts to slow before entering deeper water often acts like a feeding funnel, concentrating fish and creating excellent opportunities for anglers. I remember discovering the head of a deep hole on a small river where nothing seemed especially promising. There were no fallen trees, no visible structure, and no obvious signs that fish should be there. The only thing that stood out was a subtle change in the way the current dropped into deeper water. Despite the lack of visual clues, that small area produced several quality fish in a short period of time. The lesson was simple: the location mattered far more than the bait. If you want to find deep holes without electronics, start by paying attention to the shoreline. Steep, undercut banks are often a strong indicator of deeper water because the current has been carving away at that edge for years. Another useful clue is water color. Deep sections typically appear darker than nearby shallows, especially on clear, sunny days when differences in depth become easier to spot. The surface can reveal a lot as well. Water moving over a deep hole often behaves differently than water flowing across a flat bottom. Subtle swirls, slow circular movements, soft boils, and small eddies can all indicate changes in depth or underwater structure. If one section of the river looks different from everything around it, it's usually worth investigating because something below the surface is influencing the current. Bridge areas deserve extra attention too. The supports and pilings interrupt the flow, forcing the current to speed up, slow down, and change direction. Over time, this creates deeper scour holes, underwater contours, and current breaks around the structure. For fish, these locations provide shade, protection, changing current conditions, and a constant flow of food. During hot weather, the cooler, shaded water beneath a bridge can make these spots even more attractive. One day on a small river, I came across the entrance to a deep pocket that looked completely ordinary. There were no obvious fish-holding features, No timber, no rocks, no dramatic shoreline changes. The only clue was a slight shift in the current as it slid into deeper water. Yet within a short time, that subtle spot produced several quality fish. It was another reminder that successful fishing is often about finding the right location rather than relying on a special lure or bait. For anglers trying to locate deep water without electronics, the shoreline can provide valuable hints. A steep or undercut bank frequently signals deeper water nearby because years of current have gradually eroded the bottom along that edge. Watercolor can be another giveaway. Deep sections often appear noticeably darker than surrounding shallows, particularly on bright days when the contrast becomes easier to recognize. The river's surface can also tell an important story. Water passing over a deep hole rarely behaves exactly like water flowing across a flat bottom. You might notice gentle swirls, subtle boils, slow-moving circles, or unusual current patterns. Anytime a section of river behaves differently from everything around it, there's a good chance some type of structure or depth change is affecting the flow below. Bridges are another feature that should never be overlooked. Their pilings disrupt the current, creating pockets of slower water, deeper scour holes, and distinct current seams. Over time, these changes shape the bottom into a collection of fish-holding features. Add shade and a steady supply of drifting food, and it becomes easy to see why fish are so often found around bridge structure, especially during the heat of summer. The benefits of a tributary go far beyond cooler water and extra food. Whenever two flows meet, they reshape the river bottom. The mixing currents can carve small depressions, form sandbars, create eddies, and generate current seams. These features provide exactly what fish are looking for: shelter, feeding opportunities, and places where they can avoid fighting the strongest flow. That's why a creek mouth can often outperform a long stretch of otherwise featureless river. I remember spending a considerable amount of time exploring a small river where everything looked the same: similar depth, uniform current, and no visible structure. Then I noticed a tiny feeder creek entering the river. It was so subtle that most anglers would have ignored it completely. Out of curiosity, I made a cast near the mouth of the creek and got a strike almost immediately. Another fish followed shortly afterward. Before long, it became clear that a school of perch was concentrated right around that small inflow. There was no special bait involved. The combination of cooler water, a slight current change, and additional food sources was enough to gather fish into one small area. When a larger river flows into another river, the effect becomes even more dramatic. These confluence zones often develop into entire ecosystems of their own, with varying depths, current speeds, eddies, sandbars, and abundant forage. They can attract everything from panfish and perch to smallmouth bass, pike, walleye, catfish, and other predators. The key thing to remember is that fish aren't always positioned directly where the rivers meet. Often, they spread out across nearby structures created by the interaction of the two currents. Fish don't always position themselves in the same part of a tributary area. On some days they may hold above the confluence, on others they gather right along the current seam, and sometimes they slide farther downstream. That's why it pays to explore the entire zone rather than locking onto a single spot. Work the water above the creek mouth, the confluence itself, the seam between the two currents, and the downstream section. One of those areas will often stand out as the most productive. Another overlooked opportunity appears after heavy rainfall. Small creeks frequently wash stained or muddy water into the main river, creating a distinct color line where dirty water meets clearer water. These transitions can be magnets for predatory fish. The stained water provides concealment, allowing predators to stay hidden while watching for baitfish moving through the clearer water nearby. Northern pike are particularly known for using these color breaks as ambush points. Instead of actively searching large stretches of river, they can simply wait along the edge and attack passing prey. Similar feeding opportunities exist around overhanging trees and shoreline bushes. During the warmer months, insects, beetles, caterpillars, and other small creatures constantly fall from the vegetation into the water, turning these spots into natural feeding stations. Areas beneath overhanging cover can produce fish day after day, but success depends on stealth. Fish holding close to shore are extremely sensitive to vibrations, movement, shadows, and noise. One careless step can ruin the spot before your lure even hits the water. For the best chance of success, make accurate casts tight to the cover or slightly downstream of it, where fish are often waiting for food to drift naturally into their strike zone. A fallen tree can be one of the most valuable pieces of structure in a river. For predators like smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, and northern pike, it serves as a natural ambush point rather than just another obstacle. Large pike often position themselves near the root system or deep within the shadows, waiting motionless for an easy meal. Bass are commonly found around the branches as well, since baitfish use the tangled cover as protection. Fishing around timber isn't always easy. Snags are common, lures get lost, and patience is often tested. Yet these same locations frequently produce some of the best fish in the river. Many anglers have sacrificed a few baits around a logjam only to connect with the kind of fish that makes the frustration worthwhile. Dense cover attracts forage, and wherever forage gathers, predators are usually nearby. Undercut banks are another overlooked form of structure. Years of erosion can create hidden cavities beneath the shoreline, forming shaded pockets with added depth and protection. While these spots may look ordinary from above, they provide excellent shelter for cautious fish that prefer to avoid open water during the day. River points deserve attention as well. When a point extends into the current, the flow is forced to split around it, creating a mix of faster and slower water. Fish often position themselves along these transition zones where they can feed efficiently without expending too much energy. The area becomes even more attractive when a nearby sandbar or gravel bar creates additional depth changes and current breaks. Often, the movement of the surface water alone is enough to reveal these hidden features. Pay attention to the surface around river points. You'll often notice subtle current seams or faint lines stretching across the water where the flow separates and moves around the structure. These surface clues reveal areas where currents interact, and fish frequently use these transition zones as feeding and holding locations. Whenever you spot these seams, it's usually worth making a few casts. Sandbars are another feature that many anglers underestimate. Formed by years of sediment deposits, they can consist of sand, gravel, or silt and are commonly found along bends and slower sections of river. Some are easy to see above the surface, while others remain hidden just beneath the water. Although large fish rarely spend much time on the shallow top of a bar, the surrounding edges can be exceptionally productive. As water moves around a sandbar, the current often speeds up along one side and slows behind it. This creates pockets where food accumulates and fish can hold comfortably without battling the strongest flow. The best targets are usually the drop-offs along the edges, the water immediately behind the bar, and any transition from shallow water into deeper structure. Every angler eventually encounters a stretch of river that appears completely featureless. No obvious bends, no timber, no creek mouths, and no visible depth changes. Just a long section of water that looks the same from one end to the other. In those situations, success often comes from finding the smallest irregularity. A subtle change in current, a slight difference in depth, or a minor surface disturbance can be all it takes to reveal where fish are holding. Fish are naturally attracted to anything that breaks the pattern. It might be a small depression in an otherwise flat area, a lone boulder surrounded by sand, a patch of weeds, a faint current seam, or even a subtle difference in water color. Features that seem insignificant to us can stand out dramatically to fish and become key holding locations. These small variations provide advantages. They may trap food, offer shelter, create a current break, or simply serve as a reference point in an otherwise featureless environment. When you're fishing a uniform stretch of river, don't focus on what looks impressive, focus on what looks different. A single weed patch, an isolated log, or a section where the current behaves slightly differently can be far more productive than a large area that appears perfect but lacks contrast. One mistake many anglers make is overlooking these details because they seem too minor to matter. In reality, fish are drawn to contrast. They often relate to the one feature that stands out from everything around it. Even the smallest irregularity can concentrate baitfish, collect drifting food, and attract larger predators. So whenever you spot something unusual on an otherwise uniform stretch of water, take the time to investigate it. Those overlooked spots frequently produce the most surprising catches. A river doesn't have to display obvious structure to hold fish. Sometimes the clues are simply more subtle, requiring a closer look at the current, water color, surface activity, vegetation, and any small detail that disrupts the pattern. Fish are often attracted to the smallest irregularities in a river. A shallow depression on an otherwise flat bottom, a single rock sitting in open water, a patch of vegetation, a subtle change in current, or even a slight shift in watercolor can make a huge difference. What appears insignificant to an angler may be a key piece of structure from a fish's perspective. These minor features create opportunities. They may provide shelter, collect drifting food, reduce current pressure, or simply give fish a point of reference in a large, uniform environment. That's why, when fishing a featureless stretch of river, it pays to search for anything that stands out. An isolated weed bed, a lone log, or a small pocket of slower water can easily become the most productive spot in the area. Many anglers overlook these subtle clues because they seem unimportant. But fish are naturally drawn to contrast. They prefer locations that differ from the surrounding water, even if the difference is slight. A tiny change in structure or current can be enough to concentrate baitfish and attract predators. Whenever you find something unusual on a long, uniform stretch of river, give it a closer look. Those overlooked spots often produce the most unexpected bites. A river doesn't need obvious structure to hold fish, it simply means the clues are harder to spot. Pay attention to small changes in watercolor, current speed, surface activity, vegetation, and anything else that breaks the pattern. More often than not, that's exactly where the fish are holding. An eddy, sometimes called a reverse current, is a section of water that behaves differently from the main flow. Instead of moving downstream, it may swirl in a circle or even appear to flow back upstream. Fish are naturally attracted to these areas because the current is softer, food tends to collect there, and nearby structure or depth changes often provide additional security. It's an ideal place for fish to rest while the river delivers food directly to them. Watercolor can provide valuable information as well. Lighter colored water often indicates a shallow sand or gravel bottom, while darker water may suggest greater depth, submerged vegetation, a depression, or a nearby drop-off. The boundary where these colors meet is often worth exploring because fish frequently use these transitions as travel routes and feeding zones. Calm days are the best time to study a river. With little wind disturbing the surface, it's much easier to spot current seams, eddies, slick spots, swirls, and other subtle signs of underwater structure. Experienced anglers pay close attention during these conditions, mentally marking productive areas or recording them for future trips when changing weather makes the river harder to read. One of the most exciting clues appears when the surface suddenly comes alive. Baitfish scattering, repeated splashes, or bursts of activity often signal that predators are actively feeding. When you see this happen, don't hesitate. These feeding windows can be brief, sometimes lasting only a few minutes. In many cases, the predator is positioned on the edge of the commotion rather than directly in the middle, using the disturbance to trap baitfish. A quick, accurate cast around the activity can result in an immediate strike. Bird activity can tell you a lot about what's happening in the river. Skilled anglers pay attention not only to the water but also to the birds above it. When gulls or terns begin circling tightly over one area, diving repeatedly, and staying focused on a small section of water, it often means baitfish have been pushed to the surface by feeding predators. On larger rivers, these feeding events can sometimes be spotted from hundreds of yards away and are usually worth checking immediately. Herons can provide another useful clue. These birds rarely choose their locations by accident. They spend their time where food is readily available: small fish, frogs, and other aquatic prey. If you notice a heron standing motionless along the shoreline for an extended period, It's often a sign that the area supports active baitfish. And wherever baitfish gather, larger predators eventually show up as well. Learning to recognize signs like these is what separates experienced anglers from those who simply cast at random. Success on a river isn't just about throwing farther, changing lures constantly, or using expensive gear. The real skill lies in understanding what the river is telling you and using those clues to predict where fish are likely to be. A river is always communicating. Current seams reveal underwater structure. Variations in water color hint at depth changes. Eddies, boils, and current breaks point to cover and holding areas. Surface activity, baitfish movement, and bird behavior can reveal feeding fish in real time. The better you become at interpreting these signs, the more often you'll locate fish before making your very first cast. That's what separates anglers who consistently find fish from those who spend the entire day covering water and then blame poor weather, moon phases, or inactive fish. While luck can certainly help, success on the river is usually driven by observation and understanding. The more you learn to interpret the clues around you, the easier it becomes to locate fish before making countless random casts. Once you start recognizing current seams, drop-offs, deep holes, feeder creeks, fallen trees, sandbars, eddies, and other subtle pieces of structure, the river begins to look completely different. What once seemed like a uniform stretch of water transforms into a detailed blueprint. Fish no longer appear to be scattered at random. Instead, you begin to understand why they choose specific locations and what makes those spots attractive. If you enjoyed this video, take a moment to leave a like and share your experience in the comments. What river feature has helped you find fish most often? Is it a channel edge, a deep hole, a riffle, a log jam, a tributary, or something else entirely? Your observations might help another angler see the river from a new perspective. And be sure to subscribe, because there's much more to come. We'll dive into topics like locating walleye, finding river smallmouth bass, reading large river systems, and understanding why one spot can produce fish season after season while another area that looks nearly identical never seems to come alive. Thanks for watching, and until next time, good luck on the water and tight lines.